Hi, I'm Luke Turner, current president of the Tulsa Rugby Football Club. What you're about to see is a video celebration of our club's outstanding history, documenting decade by decade our many accomplishments both on and off the field, and all the players past and present who over the last 40 years have worn the Tulsa jersey with pride and have contributed to our success. The Tulsa Rugby Football Club began in 1974 when Chris Sutton and a small band of dedicated enthusiasts who had played the game in other places met at what can only be assumed was the McNellys of that era and formed the club. On March 1st, 1975, Tulsa RFC traveled to Fayetteville, where we bested the University of Arkansas 6-3 in the first match of what would become a winning tradition. Early members of the club included Miles Cote, Charlie Bro, Alan Heap, Jack Johnson, Mike Morris, and Jim Albertson. Chris Ford joined the band in 1977 and was soon followed by Drew Allen, Alan Hobbs, and Chaz Haywood. In 1978, Tulsa joined with other Oklahoma and Arkansas clubs to form the Ozark Union of the Western region of USA Rugby. We were playing good, hard, aggressive rugby in '78, but without enough finesse. So we brought in our first official coach, Randy Lineberger, who decided the quickest way to improve the overall play was to go on tours. This would expose the club to a high standard of play and show the players and their wives, who were also invited along, the organization and high degree of club rugby in foreign lands. Randy is credited with turning the club around and with much of our early success. In 1979, Tulsa RFC took our first of many tours. A trip to the Bahamas was organized with our mates from Memphis. It was at this time that Tulsa RFC established itself as a regional power. We then sponsored our own tour in April 1980 to England and Wales. The tour included 5 matches in 16 days, starting with St. Ives Cornwall, which resulted in a 7-0 loss. This was followed by a 22-3 loss to Cross Keys, Wales, a First Division side. The third match was in the central part of England against Warwick. The match was played in bright sunshine under the grand old walls of Warwick Castle, which stands on a hillside overlooking the rugby grounds. The fourth match was at Scarborough, England on the North Sea. Tulsa fell 26-16. It was a stop that will always be remembered by those who were on that tour as the best hosting of any in memory. By the fifth and final match, against the London Welsh at the storied grounds of Richmond Park, the boys had had their fill of losing and wanted a win. They didn't go out for the hosting as much, and on April 15, 1980, scored the club's first international win, 16-6, against a less aggressive pack and side. That win whetted their appetite for a tour to New Zealand and Australia in July of 1981. In July of 1981, TRFC toured New Zealand and Australia as the Comanches. The touring party consisted of 26 players and 7 wives. The first match took place only 6 hours after arrival. Nevertheless, a stunning victory was achieved over Dad's Army, the over 30 side of the North Shore Rugby Football Club. North Shore hosted the first 4 days in New Zealand, as well as providing liaison for the remainder of the tour there. Their genuine friendship and warmth will never be forgotten by anyone on the tour. The second match was against the Barbarians, a select side of experienced players from the Auckland area. The game was tight the whole way, but was lost in the final seconds in heartbreaking fashion. The tour then headed south to Rotorua, where the group was billeted in a native church compound. Sleeping accommodations were in one building, communal style. The unique hospitality of the Maori was much appreciated, but the match was lost 24-14. The next stop was Mata Mata, a dairy and farming community that would later be made famous as the Hobbiton from the Lord of the Rings films. The Corinthians RFC hosted us at the local racetrack clubhouse. This was probably the best party of the tour. The match, however, was probably the worst, as we suffered a 30-20 defeat. This was followed by another well-played but disappointing loss to Combined Universities, 21-18, where we were allowed access to the Barbarians clubhouse. Finally, we crossed the Tasman to play Gordon RFC in Sydney, Australia. The final match of the tour ended in defeat, 24-12, after too much exposure to the nightlife in King's Cross in Sydney. Much rugby was learned on the tour, but it became almost incidental to the touring, sightseeing, and camaraderie. After these tours, Coach Leyenberger thought we were ready for the big time, and we proved it by hosting Oklahoma's first international rugby match in 1981, when Cross Keys came to Tulsa for a return match. Up to this point, the club struggled to find a field location for regular use. That all changed in 1982, when club leaders secured our current location at 37th and Riverside from the River Parks Authority. Our rugby home is a beautiful, high-visibility location within the River Park system that the club remains proud of today. The early 1980s brought a flood of memorable players such as John Hickey, Randy Stainer, Art Gaffney, Steve Christensen, David Skidmore, Billy Shear, Kelly Gilbert, and Randy Dittman. Along with important additions to the club, Jerry McDonald, Jeff Cooper, Steve Broussard, Robert Lindsay, Randall Redinger, Scott Walker, Jim Jones, Joe Edwards, and Tom Miracle, the mid-1980s brought a flood of another kind. The Great Flood of 1986 devastated much of the city, including the rugby pitch. In 1982, the club went undefeated in league play and won our first Ozark Union title. We hosted the Western Rugby Football Union Championships, where we lost in the final to the St. Louis Falcons, the eventual national runners-up. Following this year, many of the club's senior members retired, and the club looked to rebuild. Between 1983 and 1988, the club toured frequently as part of its plan to make ourselves more attractive to new players. Southern California, Las Vegas, Aspen, Austin, and Boulder were all victimized. In 1985, it was decided to change the club colors from baby blue and white to black and gold. At the same time, Randy Stainer designed the club's crest. Its Native American brave, in full headdress and oil derrick, symbolized the city and its origins. The year of the club's founding is emblazoned at the bottom. In 1986, the club celebrated our first Old Boys game. The 1990s brought names to the club like Clayton Hosterman, Jamie Richard, Dwayne Williamson, Ty Rapana, Kevin Brown, Jake Swim, Dax and Dennis Junker, Kevin Ruschling, Scott Shriver, Scott Stelting, Steve Ingram, and Dave Hassett. Because of an aging roster and low numbers in what was traditionally a deep club, the leaders looked to the youth game to help sustain the future success of the club. A high school league was formed with 6 original members. The early 2000s brought familiar names: Doug Hillier, W.C. Grenant, Stephen Lee, Simon Marshall, and Clint Basner to the club. In 2006, the club again went on tour, this time a 10-day adventure in Thailand. 2007 saw the club's most successful year ever as we won the West for the first time and made it all the way to the Final Four. On behalf of the current executive committee, I want to recognize all the players, families, fans, and sponsors for your sacrifices over the last 40 years for the club. Your efforts have made us what we are today, and your continued support will make us what we strive to be tomorrow. And for that, I thank you.